They thought he wouldn't survive the night. A 6-week-old German shepherd pup, left for dead in a freezing forest. But when 3 black bears emerged from the trees, silent, massive, and wild, they didn't strike. Instead, they picked him up, carried him into their den, and raised him as their own. What grew inside that cave wasn't just a dog, but something the world had never seen before. Before we begin this unforgettable story, would you mind sharing where you're from in the comments, and if stories of love, loyalty, and second chances move you? Please give this video a like and consider subscribing. The wind howled over the dense pines of Olympic National Forest, dragging with it the final shreds of the late March snowstorm. Trees stood like frozen sentinels under a sky bruised with lingering storm clouds, and the ground was littered with broken branches, patches of slush, and silence, somewhere near Hidden Pines Trail. The stillness was broken by a faint, pitiful sound, half whimper, half growl, barely audible over the dripping forest. Caleb Monroe, 57, pushed through the underbrush, his heavy boots crunching the wet earth. He wasn't a tall man, but there was something enduring in the way he carried himself, stooped but sturdy, as if molded by decades of solitude and forest life. His beard was streaked with silver, and his eyes, soft blue and perpetually tired, had not truly lit up since the passing of his wife, Anne, 5 winters ago. Once a forestry professor, Caleb had retreated into the woods after her death, taking a modest job as the off-season caretaker of the ranger outpost at Hidden Pines. The isolation suited him. People didn't ask questions out here. He froze as the sound reached him again. Clearer this time, a distressed yelp, close to the old logging road that had been abandoned since the 1980s. Branches whipped his jacket as he descended into a shallow ravine, and that's where he saw it. A small bundle of black and tan fur crumpled against a fallen log, barely breathing. A German shepherd puppy, no more than 6 weeks old, ribs showing, one hind leg bent at a worrying angle, was shivering in the wet moss. Mud clung to his undercoat, and his ears twitched weakly at Caleb's approach. Caleb dropped to one knee. "Hey there, little guy," he whispered. Pulling off his glove, his fingers reached out, but just as he touched the pup's fur, the hairs on his neck stood straight. A low growl echoed behind him. Caleb turned slowly. 3 black bears had emerged from the mist, hulking forms like shadows come to life. He recognized them instantly from months of solitary observation near the ridge. Mama bear, Marla, large and scarred, her right ear torn from a fight long ago. Rascal, a lanky adolescent with a streak of white on his muzzle. And Bruno, the slow-moving, stocky male with unusually gentle eyes. Caleb didn't move. He'd seen these bears dozens of times before. They never bothered his cabin, and he never encroached on theirs. But this was different. Marla lumbered forward, not toward him, but the pup. Her enormous head dipped, and she gave a single grunt. Rascal followed, nose twitching. Caleb held his breath as Bruno came up beside the puppy, gave a deep sniff, and then, to Caleb's shock, began licking the tiny dog's fur with careful, motherly strokes. The puppy whimpered but didn't resist. Marla reached out a massive paw, not to strike, but to gently pull the pup closer, like a bear cub. Rascal nudged its side with his nose. Caleb stepped back, stunned, as Marla picked up the injured dog by the scruff and began to retreat into the forest. Bruno and Rascal followed in perfect silence. Caleb hesitated. He knew this stretch of woods, every trail and hollow. Curiosity and instinct warred within him, but his boots moved before his brain caught up. He followed them, carefully, quietly, along the animal path leading toward the old cave system near Fern Hill Bluff. He reached a high ridge just in time to see the 3 bears enter a shallow cave inside. The pup had been placed in a pile of leaves and moss, with Rascal curling beside it and Bruno standing watch at the entrance like a dutiful uncle. Marla lay down behind the pup and began grooming it like her own. Caleb sat in the shadows for nearly an hour, watching with a mix of wonder and disbelief. The pup didn't cry. He nestled deeper into Marla's fur, and the bear let him. Something primal, some ancient memory of cross-species compassion, seemed to pulse in that cave. Later, as the sun broke through the thinning clouds, Caleb quietly made his way back to the cabin, heart thudding. That night, he wrote in his journal, "Today, I saw something that makes me question every line man has drawn between species. A pup abandoned by its own kind, claimed by the wild." The next morning, he returned with a pair of binoculars and sat at the same ridge. The puppy was still there, alive, warm, fed, nurtured. It didn't seem afraid. Marla and Bruno had gone off to forage, while Rascal remained nearby. The pup even tried to mimic Rascal's awkward bear cub shuffle. Caleb sighed and smiled, his first true smile in months. He named the pup Boone, a name that meant a blessing, fitting for a soul lost, and now found by the forest's most unlikely protectors. He wouldn't interfere. Not yet. Spring melted slowly into the valley as the snow gave way to rain, and the ferns began to reclaim the forest floor in shades of fresh green. Boone, the German shepherd pup once broken and abandoned, had not only survived the wilderness, he had become a creature molded by it, under the watchful care of Mama Marla, Rascal, and Bruno. He had grown from a trembling ball of fur into a lanky adolescent whose movements were a curious blend of canine grace and ursine strength. He patted like a bear, growled in play, and had even taken to splashing joyfully in the same cold streams where Rascal liked to fish for trout. Caleb Monroe watched this evolution with fascination. Every morning before sunrise, he would trek to the rocky overlook just above the cave, hidden behind a thicket of huckleberries. He'd sit there for hours with a thermos of lukewarm coffee and his battered leather-bound field journal, scribbling observations in a tight, looping hand. Day 49, he wrote one morning. Boone has begun to mirror Rascal's bipedal posture. Stood for nearly 7 seconds today trying to reach a beehive. The behavior was beyond mimicry. Boone wasn't just imitating the bears. He believed he was one of them. He slept curled between Bruno and Marla's paws, hibernating through late winter with the patience of a cub. He growled playfully when Rascal did, lumbered on all fours like Marla, and showed signs of a developing social role within their small group, often acting as the scout, trotting ahead during food foraging trips. Yet, despite all this, his tail still wagged, his ears perked at strange sounds, and sometimes, late in the evening, he'd emit a half-bark, half-huff sound that didn't belong to either world. Caleb knew it was time to consult someone who wouldn't call him crazy, that someone was Dr. Charlotte Dean, a wildlife veterinarian whose name appeared frequently in the footnotes of academic journals Caleb had kept long after leaving his professorship. She was 33 tall, with a lean, wiry build that came from years of fieldwork rather than gym memberships. Her hair was always tied back in a frayed ponytail, and her clothes were perpetually stained with mud, blood, or both. Charlotte had grown up on a goat farm in Vermont, raised by her grandmother after a car crash took both her parents when she was 9. Loss had tempered her warmth into something quiet and enduring, never gushing, but deeply present. Charlotte arrived in a dusty green pickup, her silver veterinary crate clanging in the bed. She stepped out with a clipboard under one arm and a curious frown beneath her aviator sunglasses. "So you're the hermit with the bear dog," she said, brushing pine needles from her sleeves. Caleb, uncomfortable with directness, merely nodded and offered coffee. They hiked in silence that first morning, the trail slick from yesterday's rain. Charlotte didn't speak much until she reached the overlook and saw Boone wrestling with Rascal in a clearing below, snarling, but not viciously, tumbling like oversized puppies. Her lips parted slightly, then curved into a grin. "Well, I'll be damned," she whispered. Over the following weeks, Charlotte made frequent visits. She never intruded directly into the bear's space, but she documented Boone from afar with high-powered lenses, recording hours of footage. Caleb shared his journals, and slowly, their professional collaboration turned into something gentler. They shared stories beside campfires, swapped theories on behaviorism versus instinct, and one particularly cold morning, Charlotte brought out a harmonica and played a tune Caleb hadn't heard in years. Charlotte was the first person since Anne who made Caleb laugh again, not just quietly, but with a wheeze that made the crows scatter. Boone, meanwhile, thrived. He could climb halfway up a cedar tree now, tail swishing with delight. He'd grown into a broad-shouldered, fluffy-coated adolescent with large paws and amber eyes that looked more curious than ever. Marla still cleaned his ears with gruff affection. Rascal treated him like an annoying younger sibling, while Bruno stood guard near him during their long naps in the sun. Boone had learned to find grubs beneath rotting logs, to bat at fish from shallows, and to vocalize with a chesty grunt that startled hikers who occasionally ventured too close to the valley. One afternoon, as Caleb and Charlotte observed from behind a downed redwood, they watched Boone lie belly up in a patch of sunlight, all four legs in the air, wiggling like a cub after a meal. "He has no idea he's not a bear," Charlotte said, not quite believing her own words. Caleb took a sip from his thermos. Maybe he doesn't need to, but not everything fit perfectly. Boone's instincts sometimes betrayed him, like the time he tried to mark a tree like Rascal by rubbing his back against it, then looked embarrassed when he couldn't quite scratch the right spot, or when he attempted to chuff like Bruno and ended up sneezing violently. One morning, he was seen chasing butterflies across the meadow in an almost puppy-like joy, then leapt into the creek to join Rascal as if to say, "I'm still one of you." The duality was becoming more visible. Boone belonged, and yet he didn't. Charlotte noted it in her field report. Subject exhibits cross-species identity conditioning. Behavior suggests belonging but not congruence. He's both, and neither. Still, Boone never seemed unhappy. When summer rain drenched the forest, he'd huddle in the cave between the bears. When the sun returned, he'd race through the tall grass, tail high, barking softly at the wind. Caleb sometimes wondered, was Boone teaching the bears to be a little more dog, or were they simply allowing him to be exactly who he was then, one evening? As the first stars appeared above the pines, Boone approached the ridge alone for the first time. He stood where Caleb often sat, nose lifted, watching the distant glimmer of the ranger's cabin lights. Caleb, sitting silently on a log nearby, didn't move. Boone didn't bark. He didn't growl. He simply turned his head, made eye contact for a long moment, then trotted back toward the cave with a soft, contented grunt. Caleb closed his journal for the night. He had the feeling this was only the beginning. August came cloaked in heat and thick with the hum of insects. The forest was no longer a place of quiet snow and slow movement. It buzzed, breathed, and swelled with life. Ferns brushed Caleb's boots as he hiked the shaded paths. Boone trotting ahead with that unmistakable bounce in his step, ears flicking to every unfamiliar sound. He had grown tall now, broad-chested, lean-limbed, with fur that shimmered gold and sable in the sunlight. Yet there remained in his gait a strange heaviness, as though his paws still remembered the weight of being a bear. That morning, Caleb had been called to the southern edge of the reserve by his colleague Daniel Kerr, a wildlife enforcement officer who managed wolf tracking across Olympic's deeper sectors. Daniel was 38, lanky, with sun-worn skin and a skeptical frown that rarely left his face. He'd once been a military tracker and still moved like it, quiet, deliberate, suspicious of anything that didn't bleed or bark like it should. He met Caleb just past the boundary fence, clipboard under one arm and a radio crackling at his hip. "Something's off with the Granite Ridge Pack," Daniel said without preamble. 3 reports in 2 weeks. They've been circling closer to populated zones. Aggression, pacing behavior, barking, actual barking, not howling. Caleb blinked. "Wolves don't bark." "Exactly," Daniel replied, narrowing his eyes. "Thought I'd want to see for yourself." Caleb hesitated. Boone, curious, had wandered ahead toward the ridge where a shallow pond reflected the morning sky. "Boone's with me," he said. Daniel scoffed. "Right, your bear dog." They hiked quietly for 20 minutes before Daniel halted at the top of a slope. Below, along the brushy edge of a fire break, were at least 5 free-roaming dogs, shepherds, mostly German shepherds. Like Boone, some with darker coats, some graying with age, all lean and moving with the precision of trained working dogs. These were part of the Klamath Integration Program, a relatively new effort to use retired working dogs as companions for controlled grazing herds in isolated mountain pastures. They were allowed relative freedom within the GPS-mapped sectors, well-fed, well-trained, but still canines of primal instinct. Boone spotted them first. He froze. His ears twitched, his posture lowered, not in submission, but in confusion. The other dogs noticed him too, tails raised, approaching in a casual but curious semicircle. One of them, a large, dark-furred male with a limp, moved closer. This was Axel, about 7 years old, with a battle-scarred muzzle and the cautious demeanor of an ex-police K9. Axel sniffed the air and gave a low bark, a friendly one, meant to test the waters. Boone bolted, not with a bark, not with a whine, but with a guttural snarl, deep from the chest, followed by a scramble backwards. He turned and leapt onto a downed log, then attempted to climb the trunk like a bear cub. His claws scraped bark. His breath came in short bursts, and when he couldn't climb, he curled into himself, back arched, nose tucked between his legs, his body mimicking the defensive posture of a cornered animal, not a dog, but a prey bear. The other dogs stopped, confused. One cocked its head. Another tried to approach gently, tail wagging. Boone snarled again, this time with a deep guttural rumble. Hackles fully raised. Caleb descended from the ridge in long strides, heart thudding. "Boone, Boone, it's okay," he called, arms low and voice calm, but Boone didn't move. He didn't respond to the tone. His eyes locked onto Axel like a threatened cub facing a rival predator. Axel growled in reply, instinctively now, not aggressive, just dominant. Charlotte arrived moments later. Having been on another trail nearby, she carried a long-lens camera and her satchel of emergency meds, but her eyes fell on Boone and she instantly froze. "Don't touch him yet," she murmured. "Let me try." Charlotte crouched 10 feet away and began speaking, not to Boone, but in bear cues she'd observed over months. Low hums, slow blinks, careful posture. Boone watched her. His body trembled, but slowly, ever so slowly. He uncoiled. He padded toward Charlotte, then collapsed at her feet like a tree falling. That evening, back at the cabin, Boone lay curled in a corner of the porch, head resting on his front paws. He wouldn't eat. He didn't meet Caleb's gaze. The dogs from earlier had long returned to their designated field zone, and Daniel, shaking his head, had left without comment. But something had shifted in Boone. That afternoon had revealed something not even Boone had suspected. He didn't belong. Caleb sat beside him in silence for over an hour. The journal pages in his lap remained blank. Then, slowly, he turned to Charlotte. "What did we just see, Hot?" Charlotte's voice was soft. A pack animal who doesn't recognize his own kind. Boone whimpered softly in his sleep that night, a sound neither bark nor growl. The wind carried it through the trees like a question. Unanswered, the forest wore the colors of early autumn, golden ferns, amber leaves, and shafts of soft morning light breaking through thinning branches. But inside Caleb's cabin, the mood remained overcast. Boone hadn't wagged his tail in days. He barely responded to the usual rustling of the breakfast container or the distant call of Rascal from the valley ridge. He lay curled in the porch's farthest corner, nose tucked under one paw, ears flattened, not in fear, but in quiet withdrawal. The encounter with the free-range shepherds had left something raw and unsettled inside him, a fracture of identity. Caleb worried but didn't push. Instead, he contacted Charlotte, who had already been brainstorming, the next morning. She arrived not with her usual camera bag but with a large, rusty red van, out of which stepped a gray-muzzled German shepherd with steady eyes and a measured gait. "This," she said, "is Max." Max was 11 years old, retired from a decade of mountain rescue operations in the Bitterroots. He had a slight limp in his back right leg and bore a long scar across his left flank. Souvenirs from his final mission, when he dug out a trapped hiker in a landslide. Since then, he'd been under Charlotte's informal care, mostly resting, occasionally helping with socializing nervous animals. But Max was more than a helper. He had the energy of a mentor, calm, patient, and wise with the kind of eyes that had seen both danger and redemption. Boone lifted his head as Max approached. His nose twitched, and his ears perked, not fully upright, but curious. Max didn't approach directly. He circled Boone once, slow and respectful, then lay down facing him at a distance. Paws crossed for nearly 15 minutes, neither moved. Then Max gave a low, singular bark just once. Boone flinched. It wasn't aggressive, it wasn't commanding, it was a statement, "I see you." Later that afternoon, Max initiated play, not with bounding leaps or tail-wagging invitations like younger dogs, but with a soft roll onto his back in the clearing outside the cabin. Boone watched from the steps. Max rolled over again, then paused, looking back at Boone with a subtle tilt of the head. After a minute, Boone rose, stretched, his long bear-like limbs awkward in motion, and slowly approached. Max didn't move. When Boone reached him, Max let out a soft woof, then nudged him with his nose. The next days unfolded in slow rhythms. Max taught by example how to mark territory like a dog, not by scratching tree trunks like Rascal had shown Boone, but with subtle posture and scent. He demonstrated how to dig a cooling hole in the earth and lie in it, belly down, tongue lolling in contentment. He showed Boone how to chase squirrels without trying to climb trees after them, and how to bark not as a warning growl, but as a greeting or a laugh. Boone was resistant at first. When Max ran in wide loops through the clearing, Boone tried to lumber after him with heavy paws, slipping and grunting in confusion. But then, one evening, Boone mimicked the run, not with the lightness of a dog, but with a hybrid lope, part gallop, part bounce. He circled Caleb once, then circled Max, and when Charlotte tossed an old tennis ball from the porch, Boone galloped after it, snatched it in his mouth, and after some hesitation brought it back, tail swinging like a question. Max didn't celebrate. He simply barked once. Boone barked back, awkward, hoarse, but unmistakably a bark, Charlotte, watching from the cabin roof where she'd been repairing shingles, wiped her hands on her jeans and smiled. He's learning both languages by the end of the week. Boone had added new motions to his already eclectic set of behaviors. He would pounce on fallen leaves the way Rascal once taught him to pounce on frogs, then dash across the yard in circles the way Max did, tongue lolling and tail high. When Max sat down with his front legs neatly together and ears alert, Boone attempted the same posture, though his longer back legs often flopped awkwardly to the side, and at night, instead of sleeping curled between two bears, Boone now lay halfway on Max's blanket, head resting on Max's back, the rhythm of their breathing slowly sinking. What made Boone's transformation even more remarkable was how he began to blend his identities. One day, when a raccoon approached the edge of the cabin yard, Boone puffed up, growled low in his chest like Bruno, then took 2 bold steps forward and barked like Max, loud and decisive. The raccoon scurried away. Boone turned back toward Caleb and Charlotte, who were fixing the fencing nearby, and offered a playful huff. Then he flopped down and began licking Max's ear. Caleb, hammer in hand, shook his head. He's not choosing one over the other. No, Charlotte agreed. He's building something new in the evenings. Boone now performed a peculiar ritual. He'd walk down to the trailhead where the forest met the open pasture, sit facing the trees, and let out a long, drawn-out bark grunt, a sound that started in his throat like a bear's moan, but ended with the sharp note of a shepherd's call. It echoed off the trees, lingered, and faded. No one answered. But that didn't seem to matter. Boone had found his own voice. He was not quite a dog, not entirely a bear, but something in between, a bridge of fur, breath, and memory between 2 species that had taught him what it meant to belong, and Max, that old, scarred, and silent as ever, never left his side. By mid-October, the trees in Olympic Forest had shifted into their final colors, burnt orange, rusted red, and gold that flared like old embers before the wind carried them to the ground. In the clearing, just beyond the cabin, a small, hand-carved sign had been hammered into place. The Healing Grove, where differences belong. It was Caleb's idea, though the name came from Charlotte, who painted the words with brushstrokes, calm and steady, even as her heart thumped with uncertainty. The project had started small, just a thought scribbled in Caleb's journal after Boone had successfully calmed a skittish red fox with nothing more than a slow, tail-wagging approach and a gentle, throaty bark grunt. But now it was real. A semi-open space surrounded by makeshift fencing and cedar beams, where traumatized animals, many victims of wildfire displacements or orphaned by human encroachment, could slowly learn to trust again. Boone was at the center of it all. He moved with quiet authority through the clearing, never looming, never retreating. One moment. He was guiding a 3-legged coyote pup toward a shaded water dish. The next, he was lying belly up beside a nervous whitetail fawn, letting it sniff his floppy ears and oversized paws. His presence was a strange blend of canine safety and ursine steadiness. He barked when needed, growled when he sensed danger, and sometimes, for no reason at all, let out a soft huff before curling up near the other creatures like he belonged to all of them, and none. The sanctuary's first guests had come from a nearby wildlife rescue network, coordinated by a woman named Sarah Linwood, a small but resilient field worker in her mid-40s with chestnut-brown curls always pulled into a practical braid. Sarah's tone was crisp, her movements efficient, but beneath the surface lay a rawness. Her younger brother had passed away in a car crash the year before, and she hadn't spoken of it to anyone, not directly. But when she saw Boone the first time, how he interacted with a limping raccoon by lowering his head and offering a leaf in his mouth, she put her clipboard down and whispered, "I've never seen anything like this." Sarah became an integral part of the Grove's routine. She brought animals in crates and carriers, skittish, confused, sometimes aggressive, and left them with Boone. It was never forced. Boone would approach when the time felt right. No schedule, no commands. His way was always patient. A nuzzle here, a shared patch of sun there, one time. A half-feral husky tried to lunge at him, and Boone didn't flinch. He lay down and waited, eyes half closed, until the dog settled nearby, whimpering. Days later, the two were napping nose to nose. Max, still sharp despite his age, oversaw many of the early sessions, guiding Boone with a quiet presence. The old rescue dog rarely intervened, but seemed to know exactly when to stroll by, offer a short bark, or lie next to a frightened animal as if to say, "We're all strange here. It's okay." Charlotte documented everything, not as a sterile scientist, but with the reverence of someone watching something sacred unfold. Her voice was softer now, her footsteps less hurried. She had stopped wearing her watch. "Time doesn't matter in the Grove," she once said. Only trust. Caleb, meanwhile, built what they needed, a new shade structure, a feeding station, a tiny office shed for Sarah's records. Each nail he hammered into the wood felt like reclaiming a piece of himself. He still wore his wedding ring. He still talked to Anne at night, out by the fire pit. But now, he spoke of Boone with a warmth he hadn't allowed himself in years. "He's not just a miracle," he once wrote. "He's what happens when nature chooses love over instinct." The emotional peak came on a windless morning near the end of October. Boone had just finished a session with a young fox who had been found starving beside a logging road. The pup had finally eaten beside Boone, then curled into his side for a nap. Caleb was in the back clearing branches when he heard Boone bark once, deep and unfamiliar. He turned, and there she was, Mama Marla, larger than ever, her coat dusted with ash from the recent wildfires to the north. Behind her, wobbling through the brush, were two bear cubs, probably 6 months old, one jet black with a white patch on the chest, the other cinnamon-colored with a torn ear. Boone froze for a moment. His body stiffened, eyes wide. Then he stepped forward. Marla did not growl. She lowered her head and huffed a low, earthy greeting. Boone barked in reply, then huffed back. It was a language of memory, of shared winters, of a den tucked deep in the cliffs. The cubs stared, cautious. Boone approached. Slowly, with his ears half back, he dropped into a playbow, the same gesture Max had taught him. The black cub responded, mimicking the bow awkwardly. Boone spun once in the leaves, then gently dropped a stick in front of them. Caleb and Charlotte stood in stillness at the tree line. Watching, Boone shared his water dish. He let the cinnamon cub tug his tail, and when a hawk passed overhead, casting a sudden shadow, Boone growled and barked, stepping between the cubs and the sky. Later, as dusk settled, Boone lay curled in the middle of the clearing. Max beside him on one side, the two bear cubs on the other. Marla stood watch from the edge of the trees, as she always had. Boone was bigger now, broader, not quite dog, not quite bear. He was both, and neither, and entirely whole. Caleb walked over and knelt beside him. He placed a hand gently on Boone's shoulder. "My son," he whispered. "Not by blood, but by belonging. Sometimes. The greatest miracles come not through thunder or lightning, but in quiet places, in the rustle of leaves, the wag of a tail, or the gentle nudge of a creature who was never supposed to belong." Boone's story reminds us that identity isn't about labels or boundaries. It's about love, trust, and the willingness to become more than what the world expects. Perhaps God doesn't always send angels with wings, sometimes. He sends them with fur and 4 legs, teaching us through their loyalty, patience, and grace. Boone, raised by bears and loved by humans, became a bridge between brokenness and healing, a living reminder that no one is too different to be loved, and no soul is too lost to be found. If you believe that love can cross every boundary, if you believe that healing is possible, even for the most broken, type Amen in the comments. And please, share this story with someone who needs hope. Subscribe to the channel for more true stories of faith and friendship. And comment below your own stories of animals who changed your life. May God bless you and every creature who has ever loved you without condition.